of 4 sessions in our look at interviewing, different facets of interviewing. Last week we had a media trainer from Iowa State University talking about what happens if you're an up-and-coming politician and how do you prepare for encounters with the media. Next week, at this time, we'll be having as a guest Clay Masters. I'm sure many of you hear him on Morning Edition, also not only Morning Edition host for Iowa Public Radio, but an NPR reporter. So he will be on the big screen from Des Moines next week. So different facets, different perspectives on interviewing is what this class is about, and how they work and how these different perspectives view the interviews that are found on TV, radio, and sometimes in print and online as well. Sorry, can you hear?
Don't drop your voice.
Don't drop my voice. Okay, I'll keep it up here. You mean in the high register? Okay. This week, the bulk of our session, almost all of our session, will be dedicated to something very important, to talk about how the media deals with traumatized families. And it's a very important, often not spoken about here. Unfortunately, again and again, this happens in the news, homicides in the news, we have someone with us today who has unfortunately gone through this experience and is, fortunately for us, willing to share that so we can get some insights. It's a very rich session. I won't say it's a very easy session sometimes to digest. So let me start by introducing BJ Adams-Franklin. She is Horizon's Survivor Program Manager, and you're based in Cedar Rapids, right?
Yes.
BJ. So that's where I'm going to leave it, and you'll take it from here, and we'll have plenty of time for questions afterwards. That's why these two are here. You might be hesitant to ask questions, but this is the hour, this is the session to ask questions that you've wanted to. It's a rare experience. I hope you'll take advantage of it. Thank you for coming, BJ.
Yeah, absolutely. As Ben said, my name is BJ Franklin, and I'm the program manager of the Horizon Survivors Program. Since Ben and I, we've long time been having classes together. So when he was teaching the journalism classes, we began doing this presentation, and it's kind of changed along the way, but mostly we're going to present it to you like we do his journalism students. When Ben initially asked me if I would be willing to present to his senior class students, I thought he meant his senior journalism class. So that was our first level of confusion. But I'm very excited to see you because you're going to have a lot of life experiences to share, and there are things you're going to be able to teach us. One of the things I do want to say prior to starting this presentation, some of the things we're going to talk about can be kind of graphic. If at any time you feel uncomfortable during this presentation, please do not hesitate to just walk and take a break. Nobody's going to take it personal. Everybody has their own level of tolerance for this kind of information. And so if you don't feel comfortable, go ahead and take your break. Because I don't know what your backgrounds are, and I don't know what this could potentially trigger for you. First off, I want to introduce Cathy McKay. Cathy has been one of our survivors, and she's going to share her experience with the media following the murder of her daughter.
Thank you, BJ. Welcome, everybody. I see a lot of gray hair. I'm very comfortable with that. On March 7th, 2010, our lives changed forever. I got a knock at the door at 7:30 in the morning. There's 2 sheriff's deputies and 2 women, none of them which I know. And they come in and said, this is about Sarah Elizabeth McKay, my youngest of 3. And I said, well, don't say anything because her daughter's in the bathroom getting ready for school. So one of the girls went in there and talked to Emmy, and kept her in there while the sheriff and the BJ, it was BJ that was there, came and sat at my dining room table and told me that my daughter Sarah had been murdered by her boyfriend last night. Never in a million years did you ever think that it could happen to you. Never. But it did. So they went on to explain that her boyfriend, they had been out. They had some drinks and went to Riverside Casino, but the background for their relationship, my daughter Sarah and her boyfriend, he was abusive. He hurt her quite a bit. And we tried to talk her into leaving, but sometimes it just doesn't work like that. So when he said when the sheriff's deputy said that he had killed her, I wasn't surprised, but I was shocked, just terribly shocked. And there was a lot of crying, a lot of tears, a lot of can't believe it. So then they brought Emmy into the dining room and we had to tell her. She is 9 years old. How can a 9-year-old child even fathom, knowing that her mother had been murdered? He had evidently gotten a phone call in the middle of the night, like 3 or 4 in the morning, and it was some fella, and he had asked for Sarah, and evidently that made him very, very angry. And he took a baseball bat to her while she was sleeping. So those things that whole day, that BJ and them were there, and the sheriffs and everything, it was like a tape recorder. It just kept going through my mind over and over and over. And I couldn't get past that. My son came, he lives in Iowa City. He came over and we had to call my daughter in Texas and tell her. And it was just a whirlwind, and I don't know how I could have survived it without BJ and Survivors Program, because they are the ones that talk to the media. And I had one negative thing that happened to me. We were going to our car in the driveway, and there was a reporter out there with a microphone and a cameraman and wanted to talk to us. But we didn't want to talk. What are you going to talk about? So we just said no, and just got in the car and left. But she was not forceful, wasn't sticking the microphone in my face or anything like that, so I was grateful for that. We had a terrible time getting things organized and things. If it hadn't been for my family and Horizons, I never would have gotten through it. They were just great, and my family and friends were awesome. So he was, I don't use his name because to me he's not human. I don't forgive him, and I'm not sure I will ever forgive him. But we had a trial. It took a while, of course. Justice is not swift. And the county attorney wanted we wanted it first-degree murder. And, but the county attorney said to us, if we do the first-degree murder charge, they will pull Sarah's background up for inspection. And Sarah had trouble with alcohol and drugs, so we just didn't want Sarah's name to be plastered like that. We wanted to remember what a sweet, beautiful young lady she was. So we offered him second degree with no chance of parole until 35 years had been served, and the sentence is 50 years. And so he is now in Anamosa, and he was ordered to pay $150,000 to Emmy. So sometimes she gets these checks from the prison, and she just goes and does what her mother would do with that money, go and buy some clothes or shoes. She was 9 years old when it happened, and now she's 16. So she's a teenager. But she misses her mom terrible. And you just never get over it. That's all there. The other thing that I have a negative on the newspaper writing, there were some misconstrued, about the sequence of events and things like that, and they kind of got that kind of mixed up. But it all got ironed out in the end, and I just really didn't care whether, but I didn't talk to anybody about it or anything. The one time that I was interviewed by a TV news station was at, every year Horizons has a memorial for everyone that had been death by homicide. And we all get together, which is great, and have a memorial with music and a slideshow of these people. It's just a beautiful, beautiful evening. And I was interviewed by one of the local channels, 2 or 9, I can't remember, but this young man, of course to me he looked like he was just out of high school, but he was so gentle and sweet and kind. Never asked me how I felt, because how are you going to explain that, So he was one of the most compassionate people I'd ever come across. I was very impressed with him. He also interviewed my granddaughter, Emmy, and he was very gentle with her, did a great job with her, let her answer in her own time, and was kind, very, very kind. So that was a positive of the media for me. But every day in the newspaper there would be something over and over. Then when the trial hit, it goes again. And I guess I look at it and I read it. I saved all the newspapers, so when Emmy was old enough to know and understand a little bit more, that she would be able to read these. And she has, so that's good. The best part about the media and in a situation like this is you have BJ. You have Horizons survivors. They're the ones that talk to the media. Anyway, that's what I would prefer, because they have been in front of the media more than I have ever been. And so that was really helpful, very helpful. At the trial, we got to say what we wanted. And I made sure he knew that I would never forgive him for taking her from us. And that Emmy wouldn't have a mother to go to shopping with and to go to a prom dresses and all that, wedding and everything, just everything. And, but my ex-husband got up to the stand and said he'd had a very brief statement, but the best thing is that he said no amount of prison time will satisfy our sorrow. And I thought that was just right on. The one thing in media that I abhor, speaking in print or anything, is saying that it's, when the sentence is given for a crime, that it's closure. It's not closure. There's nothing closed about it. You think about it every single day. There is nothing about it that is closed. So I really am always emphasizing that to anybody that will listen, because I really believe that it kind of puts a block like this, it's over with. Wow. It's never over with. It's never over with. Coping with life after, you have that thing, as all of us do, before and an after. Before and then after. You have different values, you have different ways of coping, you have different ways of living, really, at that time. So my coping mechanisms are, I have a survivors group. There's a group of people that meet once a month, and you can tell them anything. They understand completely, totally. Sometimes you can't, your friends don't want to bring it up for fear that it'll bring too much to you. Well, that's not true. I mean, I love talking about Sarah. She was beautiful. She was kind, sweet. She was working at, what was it called? Hawkeye Food Service. She worked out there. Now I think it's U.S. Foods or something like that. But they loved her. She was a great worker and very dependable, and she was getting her life back on track, except for him. And I felt like there was real progress there, that she was seeing the light, but that's hard to do, step away from that. It's hard to do. So, to me, Sarah left a big gaping hole when she was murdered in our lives. I really didn't intend to raise a child again, but it's there, and we get along pretty well most of the time at 16. It's sometimes very difficult, but I have great empathy for her, and she's doing a great job. She really is. And likes to bring up her mother often. Talks about it. Talks about not through death, but her life, and how wonderful she was. So that makes me happy. But that makes Grandma happy. In March of 2010, after Sarah's death, I decided to retire. I was the nurse at the university hospitals for close to 30 years. And they were offering early retirement, so I took it. I just felt like I didn't need to have that work on me, and I just needed to be at home with Emmy. And so that's worked out really well. I love retirement. It's wonderful. So I just wanted you all to know that closure is not a word we want to use. And if someone uses that in some kind of, it's speak up. Say, well, there's really no closure. Never. You know, there's this expectation sometimes of us that we need to have the door shut on that certain part. But this is not one of those parts, not one of those times. Sarah had trouble with alcohol and drugs, and so Emmy was always living with me. So it wasn't a shock to me at 9 years old to have a child. She had lived with us since she's been 2. And Sarah was kind of in and out, had some difficulties with that. And so Emmy's really been with me since she's been 2 years old. So we're a pair. That's all there is to it. She has a lot to deal with in her life. Her dad is part of her life now. And he sees her often. He's just not in a place to take care of a daughter. That's just what it is. The support group that I come from, the survivors, I can't tell you how much they've meant to me. Just talking about Sarah, the bad, the good, all of it. And I miss her every day. I think about her every single day. And where we would be, what would happen. I don't know. No one will know. But if I hadn't had that support group, I don't know where I'd be. Because they listened to me. They cared about me. They cared about our situation. They gave hints and ways to celebrate Sarah's birthday, which was Monday. She would have been 42. She wouldn't have liked that very much. But excuse me, just a minute. The support group is people that have also lost a loved one through homicide. So it's been a traumatic experience. They are my strength. They all know what life is like afterwards. They support, listen, and care about you. It's a great way to talk about your feelings and your loved one. Non-judgmental and not uncomfortable talking about what happened, which is sometimes with your friends and family. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to bring it up. So I owe my debt of gratitude to Horizons for being a part of all of this with us, and they will forever be in my grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cathy's going to have to leave earlier, so I'm going to kind of open this up for any questions that anybody has. Cathy is not hesitant to answer questions.
I have to get Emmy from school.
She does. So we're going to give her and you guys a chance to ask any questions that you might have, and then I'll go into my presentation, and then at the end of that you can also ask whatever questions you have.
Just raise your hand and I'll make sure I get to you with a microphone if you have any questions. I'll dive in here with any questions too. Yes, Joan.
Are there any people in your support group who have lost a loved one due not strictly to homicide, but somebody who has taken his or her own life through being hounded to death or bullied or something of that sort? Because that is really murder also.
Right, I agree with you wholeheartedly, but this is just for homicide victims. The people that have, like drunk drivers, you know, that have been killed or murdered, any murder.
Catherine.
How long will this support group go on? And does the talk, the exchange of ideas, change as it goes on? Is it different now from what it was 7 years ago?
Yes, good question. Yes, things have changed quite a bit. Some of us have been there for a long time, and I think that you can go forever. I mean, some of them are, what, 9, 10?
Yeah, the support group started in 1991, which is as long as the program has been going. And that's actually how the program started, was with a mother who had her daughter, who was 17 at the time, was murdered on prom night. And so she, at that time in 91, tried to find resources for homicide survivors, and there really weren't very many. And so she started the support group at that time. Of course, the program has changed tremendously, but the support group, there's no plans whatsoever of ending that support group.
What do you do with it, with the sport? What's your role?
All I do is refer it to the facilitator at this point. I have been the facilitator of the support group for a number of years, but now there's another advocate in our program that does the support group.
The thing that's changed the most about it is that you know everybody's story, and you know birthdays, holidays, things like that. And sometimes we evolve about how to spend those days remembering, in some kind of remembrance. So we have to come up with other things to do for our for remembrance of them. And they are full of ideas. So it's great. And there's new people joining all the time. That keeps it going.
I'll get to your question in a moment. Cathy, when you read or hear about a murder in the news, how would you say you consume that news, the story of that homicide, differently than the rest of us? What are you paying attention to? You mentioned closure. Are there other points that you're particularly paying attention to?
Well, mostly I'm paying attention to who are the survivors. The parents, the mother, the father, the siblings, the children, is more than I'm paying attention to in the story.
One of the things I know journalists struggle with who cover these is, what is as a journalist, the community deserves to know what happens in their community with something like that. So that's a need with a larger community. It doesn't. Joe says no.
I don't agree. The community does not have to know about it.
If there's a murder in your community, you don't want to know about it.
Murder is something else, but it doesn't have to know about all the gory details.
That's exactly the point. I'm glad you spoke up there,
Correct.
because it seems to me for journalists, what you struggle with, and I know BJ will talk about this too, where is the line? Where are the unwritten rules in telling the degree of detail about what happened? And your case is a case in point.
Right. I was shocked to see in print that they had so vividly said how she died. And but there were other things that he did to her body that nobody said. So I was grateful for that.
Is there some sort of rule or some thoughts you could give us about whatever the circumstance of homicide that would satisfy both the community in knowing enough about it, but not too much as to be re-traumatizing for the family members?
Well, I think that the community wants to know if there was a gun involved. I mean, that is, so if they say, like Sarah was murdered with the bat, then I would say in the story they could say no gun was involved, instead of going into what happened. I don't know. I don't know how that's a really tricky.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let me get to some other questions before. How much time did you have? We have just about 4 past.
Oh, no, I have to be there at 4.
Or 4 past 3.
No,
So when do you have, how many more minutes do you have for us? Just
20.
20 minutes, very good. Okay, Mary.
I was wondering how you found out about this organization. I think they're just marvelous, and I was wondering, did the sheriff were they brought to you? I mean, how did it work out?
I think the sheriff contacted them. Yeah.
And how is this supported? I mean, is this going to be in the budget that'll get cut? I mean, what?
Well, they run on grants, and they were always
Federal
ranked
grants, local
federal,
grants?
local.
It's a federal grant that it's called the Victims of Crime Act funding. And so it goes from the federal government to the state, and then the state determines who gets the money. So that pool of money is divided between our program, sexual assault programs, shelter programs, domestic violence programs, and all of that. So any kind of nonprofit that's involved in assisting people or in the social service arena are going to divide up that money. We took a $12,000 cut this last year with all of the cuts, which really wasn't as bad when you consider that a lot of programs were closed. We were very happy that they only cut us $12,000.
In our survivor support group, we said that we'd have a bake sale if they were going to close it down.
They were going to be really expensive cookies, I'm just telling you.
Are there people who refuse the support group and don't want to be in it? Or do they always try it?
Not everybody is ready at one time to, they may not be at a point where they want to acknowledge the reality of what has happened, and so the support group just may not be fitting for them at a certain time. I've had survivors who have come back at other times and wanted to be involved. Most everybody who's offered the program services that are beyond the support group, most everybody chooses to be involved with our program.
It took me quite a few months afterwards to get to actually go to a session.
What prevented you?
I didn't think I needed that. I had family and friends and things, but as time went on, I could see that, people didn't want to talk about Sarah. They didn't want to discuss the details and things like that, which I still needed to do. And so I thought, well, maybe I better go. So.
Is that typical of what Cathy experienced? So I'm just looking for the way a person would talk or things a person would say who is not ready yet for that kind of support would be similar to what Cathy just said. I don't think I need it.
Yes, that's a big part of it. Or this is a very private thing for me, and when the media gets involved and all these other people that you don't know have these intimate information about a loved one, then a lot of times people just want to kind of hold it close and not share that. So I think part of that is just this is mine right now, and I don't want to share these incredibly vulnerable feelings.
Other questions before we let Cathy go pick up Emmy?
How many are in?
Let me get to you just one.
And in the support group, and do most of them show up most of the time, or is it kind of pick and choose whether or not you're going to go?
Right. At this time, Emmy has a job. So I have to because she refuses to drive, so I have to get her to the job. And I was telling BJ that I haven't been for a few months because I can't get her there, and the meeting's in Cedar Rapids. And so that's hard to get to. But I think that most of them are regulars. And there's probably 6 to 12 at different times,
Okay, John has a question here. Thank you.
It was implied that BJ was kind of an interface with the media kind of initially. How did that dynamic work? How did she get informed enough to share information that satisfied the media and helped you?
I think the sheriff was well informed with, and gave her information. And also she, was, close to me. I mean, she was there day and night, with us. And so I think that the information and things that she gave were, and she also has been through this so many times that she know what to say, which you, as a survivor, what do you say?
And if I can just jump on that also, not only did I get information from law enforcement, but I always check out with law enforcement in regards to, is this something that can be shared? And before I even, once I get there, okay, then I talk to Cathy and say, hey Cathy, you're being asked to be interviewed. Do you want to do that interview? Okay, you don't want to do the interview, but you do want to make a statement. What do you want me to present to them? Or what do you want me to stay away from? And so a lot of times, that's kind of my guideline in dealing with the media.
Question back here.
I know in different support groups, like hospice, there's an adult group and then there's support for children. Is there a support group for survivors of, or not?
Are you talking children or
Children, are you
teens?
talking about the 6, 7, 8-year-old? Or is there a support group for them?
There really isn't at this point. A lot of times with child survivors, we're gonna try to refer them to a play therapist or a mental health worker that specialize in children and trauma. April is the other advocate, one of the other advocates in our office. She's gonna be in control of my down button there. She is actually in the process of forming a team support group that's going to talk about different victimizations and trauma and how you go on from there.
Go back to the back where Monica has it going. Slip around this way. Do it this way.
I think this is a little bit extension of John's question. How were you contacted? Did you get phone calls? Did media knock at your door?
Well, first of all, I didn't have a home phone, so that was a blessing. And they didn't have my cell phone, so they had to be face to face if they were going to interview me, but they usually went through the sheriff's department or you. That's how we did it, and I said, I don't want to interview anything. I don't know what to say. I mean,
And finally here, before Cathy leaves, why are you talking with us? I would have a question, and I think others would have a question. Why on earth would someone who suffered the loss that you have want to stand up in front of us and talk about it?
because there must be somebody in this audience that has lost a loved one through some tragic event. And the closure thing is a big thing with me. I get really agitated when guys use that word. It just is not closed. It just seems like it's a finality. So I guess I just like to talk about it because it's Sarah. I mean, the good and the bad. Yeah.
Do you think, and we've come out of this a little bit in our society, death by suicide, other things. Do you think we need to have this as less of a taboo? We have to remember that how many thousands of people are murdered in this country every year. And so this affects millions of people, doesn't it?
Right. It affects millions of people. The other thing is that, you just can't sweep it under the rug. It just doesn't, so more people need to speak about it. More, we need to get under control.
Did you have friends, perhaps close friends, who didn't know how to behave around you and your family afterwards, who actually, this was the end of a friendship? Or marked some sort of change in the relationship?
My closest friends, of course, nurses, you know, they were always my closest friends. But there were people that showed up at the house that I haven't seen in a long time, and they didn't know Sarah very well, and they just showed up, you know, to find out more information. They kept wanting to know more information, and I didn't want to tell them.
They were their own
They were
self-described reporters. They put themselves in.
right. They wanted more intimate details.
How do you remember the first time that happened, and how did you respond?
Well, I used my sense of humor, mostly. And I would turn to my friend Cher and say, "Why are they here? I don't even know them very well." You know, and then we wouldn't answer the questions. We'd just kind of make some other, and then my son, who was great at this, he would usher him out the door. He would say, "Well, you guys need to leave because it's hard." So.
This is also a friend question. So of your dear friends, do you have suggestions of us as friends, if we have someone who has experienced this sort of thing, how to ask or encourage? You say that
Right.
sometimes your friends just didn't want to talk about it, or the time, you know, okay, we've done
Right.
that. How would you tell us to let you get the conversation started if you want to with a dear friend?
Well, I am appreciative of someone that says, "Okay, so Monday was Sarah's birthday, so it's a hard day for me." And my best friend just texted me and said, "I know this is a hard day for you, and I really, I'm thinking about you." And then I had another one that just called me and was just talking about Sarah. And so it was helpful. She said, "How old would she be today?" And I would tell her, and we laughed because Sarah would not like being old. Oh, I know, 42. Brother. So I think that it is, it's okay to bring up their names, whether they've passed away from a heart attack or anything, from suicide, anything. Bring their names up. You know, how are you going to remember that person on their birthday, or just ask about them.
Okay, I think Cathy has to go to pick up Emmy. We don't want you to be late for that, Grandma. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think this is a good time, if it's okay, BJ, we'll take a 5 or 10 minute break and come back, use the restrooms, and then we'll go to the end of our session with BJ here. She will expand on this past this one case. BJ has many experiences, many cases she can look back on and share. Yes, it is too bad. That she can share how the media has interacted with other families. But Cathy, thank you much. And let's sort of 25 past. Can we look at that as a time to reconvene? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to continue with BJ Franklin of the Horizon Survivors Program. And we heard about one specific case, and now BJ is going to share more cases and her experiences here. BJ.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it. One of the things that you're going to find is when we do some teaching, we tend to tell some stories because we want you to get a clear understanding of what it is we do and how it can be impactful and helpful. And so that's sort of part of the reasoning behind our stories. Ms. Amber, you want to click to the next one for me? Okay, this one is a quote that I got, and it's basically the reporter of a story involved in violence can only do better work by learning about trauma. And one of the reasons that we say that is like, you aren't going to cover the World Series if you don't know anything about baseball. So if you don't have any information about trauma, please don't go and try to interview a traumatized person, because you're going to step in it over and over again. It's not just a matter of, you know, stepping on somebody's toes. You're going to do damage if you go in unaware. Whoops. You're failing at your job, April. No raise for you this year. One of the things I wanted to tell you is CSI and CS, Law and Order SVU, Law and Order Criminal Minds. Okay, you got the idea? One time I counted up all the Law and Order, not specifically that, but like Criminal Minds, blah, 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 and I got to like 32, I think is what I told Ben's class one time. Did any of you guys watch that show? Watch any of those shows? Come on, I watch those shows, okay? Actually, I used to watch those shows with my daughter, and I'm like, see that? That's not true. See that? No. You know, it was really funny. I went to a presentation once, and one of the assistant attorney generals was teaching it, and he was talking about how on some of those shows, they'll talk about using a certain machine to get evidence, and he's like, that machine doesn't exist, you know? So it's really interesting. So I'm sorry if I'm ruining those shows for you, but I did want you to know that they don't exist. One of the things I do want to say is that there is actually an effect. It's called the CSI effect on juries. Has anybody heard of that?
Yes.
Who said yes? Okay. Do you want to talk about what that is?
Well, it's just that, as I understand it, which isn't very much.
Oh, hold on, please, we're getting a microphone to you. You didn't know you'd be quizzed, this is really good. Okay, you do know about the CSI effect.
Well, I've heard of it, and I'm not even sure I need that, I'm very loud.
We need to
We're
have.
on television.
You're on television.
Oh dear.
That's how I feel too.
That juries demand a higher level of evidence these days, because they've seen on CSI and NCIS and that, they've seen all this evidence being gathered, like fingerprints, and you get this little hair, and you know, they can suddenly get a DNA match, and you know, all of this, and that it's unrealistic.
Yes, you're exactly right. And so what it does is it sets up jurors to think that all of this very specific DNA or physical evidence is going to come in, and when they don't get it, they think that the prosecution didn't present a good case. And so literally I've watched jury selection where prosecutors are, oh, do you watch CSI? Is this something you pay attention to? Because they want to get a sense of if that's in their brain. And like I said, some of the machines that they use don't exist. And the other thing is, like, one of my favorite things, because I do end up watching some of these just to relax, is when they do time of death. You know, when they're like, doctor, what's the time of death? And she goes, within the last hour and a half. Well, you know how they figure out time of death? They figure it out by the last time the person was seen alive. So they'll go, oh, we talked to Joey and he saw her alive at 10 o'clock. And nobody saw her alive after 10 o'clock. So then what will happen, but she was found at 7 o'clock the next morning, okay? So they'll say time of death is anywhere from 10 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the morning, okay? I mean, they can do stuff with like body temperature, that lividity and those kinds of things, but really that's how they do time of death, which is, I just laugh every time I hear that. Time of death is within the last half hour. doesn't work. Anyway, these programs really give us any view of the terrible emotional impact on survivors of murder, and often the victim is given little attention. And a long time ago, the victim was basically seen as a piece of evidence. They were seen as another piece of evidence in the case. And so I don't believe anymore that that's what's happening, but through media stories sometimes, the victim goes back to being just another piece of evidence. Does that make sense? Okay. We don't want that. Is there another one? No? Okay. A victim's biggest fear in dealing with the media is they literally do not want to do or say anything that's either going to impact the investigation, the trial, or the case. Because their biggest fear is that they're going to say something to media and that the defense is then going to use that to ask for a mistrial, or they're going to, one of the big things we've been having lately, I can't even tell you how many cases we've got in this, but we're having motions for change of venues. And so what they do in those cases is they take, like the trial happened in Iowa City, but because of the media coverage, they want to move it out to Davenport. You see any problems with that for victims and survivors? Right? Go ahead, John. Right. Yeah, it's totally inconvenient, and they have to stay at a hotel. And so unless we can work it out, unless the program can work it out so that we can convince the hotels to bill compensation directly, then the Iowa's compensation program is reimbursable. So you have to come out with the money first, and then you get reimbursed. And currently, crime victims' compensation is about 3 months behind. So think about that. The other thing, and I get kind of a twisted sense of humor about this, is crime victims' compensation also doesn't cover food. So even if you have to move there and you talk into the hotel and the hotel says, okay, we'll bill crime victims' compensation and we'll just put this on hold on our books, well, then you gotta find a way to feed these folks, because compensation doesn't cover food. So it's like, yeah, we can get them to trial, but we're not gonna feed them. So that's kind of a big issue. One of the things that we do, and I am a shameless person in asking for money, one of the things that we do is we are trying to get folks to donate gift cards, like $100 of McDonald's gift cards, $100 of Subway gift cards, anything like that, so that we have those on hand, and pretty much wherever you go, there's a McDonald's right on every corner, Subway, that kind of thing. So we're always looking for that. Actually tonight, and I apologize for the jeans and big sweater, but tonight I'm going out with Mount Mercy's Criminal Justice Program group, all right? And they are adopting a family. And so I'm gonna be selling Orange Theory ice cream tonight in the cold. Just want to put that in there, in the cold, to raise money so the criminal justice program can adopt a family. Because this is a horrible case where a young woman was stabbed to death in the Hy-Vee parking lot in Marion. Do you guys remember that case? So that case went through trial. He was found guilty of first-degree murder, sentenced to prison for life, no chance of parole. Family's thinking, okay. The Supreme Court looked at that case, said that it needed to be retried, and so now it is scheduled to go back to court and trial in March, okay? Problem being, guess what? They used up all their victims' compensation for that first trial. So that's one of the big issues, is if there's multiple trials, if there's multiple defendants, crime victims' compensation is not going to cover it. And so we're constantly, right, April, shameless beggars to try to get people covered for these trials, get them adopted. That's what we call it, getting families adopted during these trials. We have another trial that's going on currently, and I share these stories because I've gotten permission from families to share these stories, so I don't want you to think I'm breaking confidentiality. I always talk with families first off, and I'm like, can I share this? And I don't talk about it unless I get the okay, so I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm not being unethical. But we have a trial going on right now that is in Keokuk, Iowa. And Jeff Sessions actually sent a federal prosecutor to assist with this case. And because it will be tried next as a hate crime. So they have this special hate crime federal prosecutor who's coming and assisting with the current murder case. Well, this family, and in this case, there are 3 defendants. So compensation is basically going to cover this first trial, and then there'll be a second defendant and a second trial, and a third defendant and a third trial, and each time they have a trial, they're going to move it, okay? It got moved from Burlington to Keokuk, and now it'll be moved from Burlington, not to Keokuk, but to somewhere else, and then the third defendant will be not in Burlington, not in Keokuk, not in Davenport, but potentially in Tama. Okay, do you see what I'm saying? So the family's moving all over, already used their compensation, and is really gonna need some assistance. So onward and upward. Most of my clients and April's clients, the folks that we serve, have never been in a courtroom prior to this case. So like Cathy had never been in a courtroom, never stepped foot in a courtroom until the murder of her daughter. So whole new language, whole new culture, whole new jobs, all of that is totally new. And so it's very important to have somebody walking along with you on that. Go one more. There's another one. There you go. Thank you. Okay, anybody know what secondary victimization is? What's that, Joe?
I didn't hear what you said.
What is, does anybody know what secondary victimization is? Okay, the first victimization is obviously through the perpetrator, okay? Sarah being murdered by her boyfriend, that is a primary victimization. Secondary victimization is through the legal system, through the media, through the criminal justice process just in general, okay? I'll give you an example of how the criminal justice process does it. One of the big things that defense attorneys used to do before prosecutors got smarter was, and I'm throwing that out to all my prosecutor friends, but what they used to do is they would put the family on the witness list. Does anybody know why? Why the defense attorney would put them on the witness list is because if they were a witness, they couldn't attend court. So what was happening is the defense attorneys, even though they had no intention of calling these folks, they put them on that witness list, and then they couldn't attend court. So what has changed now is people have gotten smarter and said, okay, you want the defendant's family to be able to attend court, right? Yep. Then you need to let the victim's family be in court. And so there's kind of a, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of stuff. And so some of that's kind of stopped. But that used to be another kind of victimization. You're not allowed to be in the courtroom of, your daughter's alleged killer. So, I really like this quote. It says, if truth is the first casualty of war, privacy is often the first casualty of any devastating, unexpected event. So I always think, good gravy. If somebody were to come into my house at any given moment, they're either gonna see it incredibly clean or it's just gonna look like a tornado. You know that joke about, oh my gosh, I've been robbed, because your house is just chaos? I use that joke. But that privacy piece, You know, like when Cathy was talking about not wanting Sarah's background to go out in public, you know, she doesn't want to have Sarah's history of drug use, Sarah's history of problems with alcohol, those kinds of things. Families a lot of times don't want their person's mental health out there. We had a case where the individual was homosexual, but hadn't come out to very many people. His parents knew, but like his grandparents didn't know, or his aunts and uncles didn't know. Well, the media was saying that they were gonna put that out there. So, you know, because the public's right to know, well, I agree with Joe, they don't really need to know this individual is homosexual, but that privacy piece is kind of put on the wayside. And then we know that the interviews, the stories, the photographs, all have the potential to either hurt or they have the potential to assist healing. So when Cathy was talking about that reporter that was so gentle with her, was gentle with Emmy, you know, that's gonna help her healing process. Whereas when they've put out details of how her daughter was murdered, that's painful, and you're gonna impede that healing process by doing that.
Just to add on to what BJ said, I think one of the biggest events that sticks out in my mind about this piece for the secondary victimization is it's almost when there's a homicide, it's breaking news, you get that little bleep, right? And what's the first thing that you see? A picture. Well, every event or every news wants to have that first picture. So instead of waiting to allow the family to put a picture on, if they have ever been in trouble in the past, they go and what do they pull? The jail mugshot. You'll see that so many times. And that is one of our biggest struggles is at any point in time, we don't want people digging through our past or what might be going on. If by chance someone one time got arrested for something they did, it doesn't need to go public for everyone to see, well, this person was already bad, so it doesn't matter. To that family, it does matter. To that child who sees their dad's picture up there, that does matter. So that is one of my biggest complaints, one of the biggest things I've done working with the media is to say, you call us, we will get you a picture within an hour. We'll contact the family and we will find a nice picture. No matter what your background is, you have that right to respect. So next time you see a mugshot, don't be like, oh, they're a horrible person. Thank you.
Just know that April is vicious on that piece. Vicious. She looks really sweet, and I say that little animals help her dress in the morning, but she's vicious. Yeah.
How useful would we as consumers of the media be in
Let me jump over here so we can get this on the tape here.
So,
John?
Yes, how useful would it be for us as consumers of the media to contact the station and say, we find this to be unacceptable. We know this is something you're doing. And if they were hammered by 100 people every time this happened, Rod Steele gets sick of hearing from me sometimes.
Yes,
When I contact
absolutely.
the station.
No, and that is so important, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because, you know, like Joe, you were saying, you know, the public might have a right to know that a crime occurred or whatever, but they don't need the intimate details. One of the things that drive me crazy currently is that there's a new baby homicide and they keep talking about the maggots that were found on the baby, right? Every time they report that, number one, I'm thinking, my kids always were running through the living room during news time. I don't want them to hear that. Number two, people don't need to hear that. And number three, the family doesn't need that to go out there. So that's my current, like, you're making me crazy. One of the things that we ask journalists to do is make absolutely certain that death notification has been done prior to releasing a story that somebody's died. So, and the way that you do that as a journalist is you call and ask law enforcement. Hey, I'm a reporter with X, Y, and Z. I need to know, has the family all been notified of this homicide before I release my story? And again, you're running into that, I need to get the first story out there. So a lot of times that is skipped. I had a client that his daughter was killed in this office building, and they ran it at 6 o'clock news. And so they had all these photos of the building, okay, the office building. They had a photo of the car of the victim, and they said a female employee from this building was killed or murdered last night, da, 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 okay? Dad's watching that, drinking his coffee, going, huh, my daughter works there. Oh my gosh, I think that's her car. Oh my gosh, they just said it was a female. So Dad now has been notified that his daughter was murdered, okay? So we just really ask that media take that time to find out if it's been released or not. It just seems like common sense to me, but a lot of times, like I said, it's that rush to get the story out. Yeah?
Are they pretty good about doing that?
I think that some stations are better than others. Yeah. Let me see. One of the things...
On that point, BJ, I know in past presentations you talked about this, that you, as a journalist, you do yourself and your organization a favor by developing a good reputation with BJ and her people. And you can, while I don't think there exists a blacklist, you can develop a poor reputation, and actually, in the long game, you may win it, maybe something in the short term, but in the long term, these people have the connections to get an appropriate story out there, to do what's necessary to inform the community, right?
Absolutely. And I will talk about that a little bit. Ben's just jumping ahead of me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, April, there we go. And one of the things with death notification is it's almost impossible now to make sure that law enforcement has notified everybody, because literally it's out on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, or I don't even know all of them, in regards to, wow, did you know so-and-so was killed, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so it gets out there on social media before law enforcement literally can notify people sometimes. Okay. One of the things we ask is for people to have a little compassion when they're doing stories. We ask that people don't interview at inappropriate times. Inappropriate would be immediately following the crime, at a hospital, at the funeral, at the trial. All of those times are not going to be an appropriate time to talk to somebody who has been horribly victimized. And then the problem is, this is the other side of that coin, the problem is there's no good time. There's no right amount of time, there's no perfect place, and each survivor's guilt is going to be unique to that person. So, we're telling you not to do it at an inappropriate time, but I'm also telling you that there's no way to necessarily know when it is an appropriate time. Okay, so what I do say is during these situations for sure, that is not appropriate. I'll give you an example. Number one, national news has no shame. I've done a number of nationally covered homicide cases here in Iowa, and national news, no shame. They will do everything under the sun to get the story. I'll give you an example. We had a media person. This was a case where there was multiple children that were killed. We had a media person who went to the grave site and started taking pictures of the holes and the caskets. Appropriate? Not so much. I have been called media Nazi before. I take that with a large grain of pride, because I chased her away. Because I was like, this is not appropriate. But that might not be exactly how I said it. The other case I had was literally we had what we call, it's a bad title, but we call it the war room, where all law enforcement gather, the prosecutors gather, everybody gathers to kind of talk about the case, talk about, talk with the family about how they want to handle this, blah, blah, blah. And we had a reporter that kind of snuck in with the family, okay? Because, we don't know everybody, all the players at this point. But one of the sons turned around and was like, "Who the hell are you?" And the person's like, and then we figured out he was media. And it was like, go away. This is not an appropriate place for you to be. So yeah, we've had media sneak tape recorders in to the first church service after Coach Thomas was killed. The family was very involved in their church, and people knew that that was going to be a big deal for that community. And so we literally had a reporter who was friends with somebody in the community. I'm hoping not close friends, but they allowed him to come to the service with them. And then the wife saw him recording the service. So literally, I stood between him and the son and said, "Give me the tape recorder." Because again, that's just not appropriate. And sometimes we can portray that we have a lot more power than we do. Like, if he didn't give me the tape recorder, what was I gonna do, Turn him into the media police? Not really. So, but if you go in and are like, no, they usually will listen to you. This is also another quote from a book I was reading on journalism and interviewing individuals in traumatic situations. And it's critical that a deliberate decision replace a knee-jerk assumption that reporters must interview all victims, photographers must shoot all injured people, and pen and film should capture all tears and screams. Now, that a lot of times is going to go contrary to, again, what the media needs. And when I'm talking about this, I used to be so hard on the media. Ask Ben. I was so hard on them when I first started this. April still doesn't like the media, but we won't talk about that. But part of it was I just felt like they were taking advantage of people at their most vulnerable. And what I found was that there are a number of incidences where attorneys have chosen not to photograph or not to interview or not to write something. One of the things we have a lot of times is families, especially in the beginning stages, are going to say things that they would never say. And so it's really on the media in those situations to determine, am I going to use that emotional outburst, or am I going to respect that this is where the person is and that they would not normally say that? Okay, does that make sense? All right, go ahead. Oh, Coate and Simpson are the authors of the book that I snagged a lot of these quotes from. Again, this is just kind of the same thing. An interview needs a deliberate judgment about the capacity of the other person to understand what an interview entails, including potential ramifications of the interview. Click again for you, April. It's not enough that a person agrees to the interview. The ethical burden is not on the person being interviewed, but on the reporter who's doing the interviewing. I had a situation, and I will never forget this. I was involved in the Coach Thomas murder case out of Parkersburg. Do people remember that case? Okay. One of the things that the program had worked on was allowing the teenagers who were in the weight room who witnessed the murder. One of the things that we did was, and it sounds totally crazy and I can explain why at some other point, is we worked it out so that the witnesses could return to the weight room. So and I don't know how they figured it out, but we had sent letters home with all the witnesses that said, it is your choice whether or not you want to come back to the weight room. If you do not, absolutely okay. If you do decide to come back to the weight room, we need you to have an adult family member with you. and you need to speak with, at that time it was me, then we got other advocates involved, but you need to either speak with BJ or you need to talk with one of the counselors that is on site. So I had a reporter call me and say, hey, we heard that you're having the students go back to the weight room. Is it okay if we talk with them and take photos? And I was like, oh no, okay. And so one of the things I did was I said, look, I totally understand that this is a story that people would be interested in, okay? These poor witnesses going back to the weight room, why would you do that, blah, blah, blah. But I said, if you do that, if they see media there, if they are afraid they're gonna get their pictures in the paper, if they're gonna do that, they're not gonna come. And they may really, really need to have that opportunity to return there. And she said, okay, I will not cover it. I will never forget that, because she had a huge opportunity to get a really good story, okay? And she chose, for the health of the witnesses, to not cover it. And she just said, I will not have a camera there, I will not cover it, I'm not gonna mention it in any stories. And I will never forget it, because she didn't have to. That's that good relationship that Ben's talking about. One of the things we ask is filming and photographing scenes with bodies, body bags, and blood, and then repeatedly using those as a lead-in. It's kind of, Cathy talked about that too. It's like every day there was a new story, there was a new piece, whatever. And so we literally say, you know, can you not use that as a lead-in all the time? Can you not, you know, do you have to show the body bag being taken out? Do you have to, you know, show, they don't usually get much past the body bags, but those kind of situations. Go ahead. This is a news article that was in the paper. It was on another case that we had. And it says, Fry stated to the investigators that Dayton assisted in trying to wrap Bailey's head with saran wrap and had also struck Bailey in the head with an object during the struggle. That evidence was recovered in a search warrant. Bloody clothing, bloody shoes, and bloody plastic wrap were amongst the evidence that are believed to belong to Hilgendorf. Go ahead and go. Plainview observed a glove that appeared to have blood on it, an object wrapped in a towel near the console area, and a dark colored bag in the back. Hilgendorf has stated that a rock is within the vehicle that was used against the victim. Okay, that was an article that came out in regards to a murder case. The person who was involved in this, the victim, had a child that was entering his first day of high school the day after this came out. So think about that just for a second. You're hearing that your dad was hit with these objects, and look at how many times it said bloody. Bloody gloves, bloody clothing, blah, 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 okay? Saran wrap. Do you think that the kid was like, what the heck did they use saran wrap for on my dad? You know, so obviously, I mean, kids have enough anxiety about starting high school, right? Well, this came out the day before. And I have always held it against the media because it's like, you knew he had a kid. You knew what age that kid was. You knew school was starting. And you chose to print this the day before. To me, that's not ethical, all right? Or compassionate. Let's talk about euphemisms. Using euphemisms to describe victims and offenders. So euphemisms are often utilized to capture the essence of a violent act in the brief, memorable manner. However, in doing so, the identity of the victim can be demeaned and lost. I'll give you some examples. Once I was sitting in a group, it was a pretty large group of family members. It was grandparents of the victim. It was their children. It was their siblings. It was a number of different types of close relationships, okay, and I'm sitting in this room and we're talking, and the TV is on because there's constant news stories, right? And we're kind of talking about some of those and how they're dealing with them and that kind of thing. And on the bottom is, you know, that little ticker tape thing that goes through. Well, while I'm trying to talk to this family and the grandchildren of this person, the victim, it runs across on the bottom the case of the rotting corpse. I literally saw that and went, oh, oh. And then I looked at the family and I said, you know, sometimes the media just sucks. And they were like, yeah. But I'm like, is there any thinking in your brain before you put this stuff out there? Who wants their grandparent identified as the case of the rotting corpse? I'm like, people, what are you doing? Okay? Let's talk about glamorizing the offender. Handsome, intelligent, rape crisis center volunteer, law student. Anybody know who it is? Bundy. Ted Bundy. These were the descriptions that were put in the media in regards to Ted Bundy. Okay? Handsome, charming, law student, rape crisis volunteer, blah, 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 blah. That was what's put in there. While descriptions can be essential to news stories, what adds insult to the victim's injury is a lack of such details in describing the victims of the crime. So they also use euphemisms with the victims. So the case of the rotting corpse, that's one. The pizza delivery guy. Anybody know what that case was? That's right. Do you have any idea who the victim is in that? Nope. What you remember is, what? He was a pizza delivery person, right? That sums up this man's whole life. It doesn't talk about his family. It doesn't talk about anything about him. It says he was a pizza delivery guy. Another one would be, my mind's blank, it'll come back to me. There are all kinds of euphemisms that get used with victims as well as offenders. I printed this out because I wanted you to, in regards to glamorizing the offender, this was a news story that was run in the Gazette. This was the offender, okay? She just needed a little love, was the headline. This woman premeditatedly killed this victim with a hammer. She beat him to death with a hammer so she could steal his pizza delivery money and his car. But she just needed a little love. Okay? She just needed a little love. How do you think the family felt in reading that? Think about how you would feel in reading that headline at the loss of somebody to murder. Right? Okay. Stigmatizing the victim. This also happens. Part of what April was talking in regards to the mugshots, that's the way that they do it. Only using public records, arrest records, etc. to give a description of the victim. This is an example of something that literally was put in the paper. Wendy Barnes, petty theft, sex phone operator, used interview by her public defender. That's the way they describe the victim. So what's your now sense of Wendy Barnes? She had it coming. She was trouble already, okay? She put herself at risk. And you know what else it tells me? That's not gonna happen to my family. I'm not a sex offender, or I'm not a sex phone operator. I'm not a petty thief. I'm not any of those things. So therefore, my family's safe. My daughter doesn't do these things. I don't do these things. So this homicide doesn't relate to me. And it allows me to put that distance between the crime and myself and my family, okay? And I believe that that's done intentionally to make people feel more safe, okay? Because nobody ever wants to think homicide could touch you, okay? So the problem is when family doesn't want to be interviewed, in that case, explore the situation with the family and give options. So one of the things that happens a lot of times is the media will say, does Cathy want to be interviewed? Does the family want to be interviewed? And I'll say, no. And then they'll be like, okay, go ahead, flip it, April, would you? Go ahead. Oh, okay, yeah, right here. Go a couple more down. So what they end up doing if they don't pursue this a little bit more is they end up relying on people that are kind of questionable. And one of the things, do the next one, okay. So one of the things that happens for these families is families will see these interviews on TV, and I can't tell you how many times families have gone, who are these people, okay? And it's folks that I believe are looking for their 15 minutes of fame. I was their best friend. I've known them forever. I've this and this. And the family literally does not know who these people are.
Does that explain also perhaps Cathy's stories of people she hadn't seen for a long
Yes.
time? Why are you here?
Yes.
They are perhaps that same category of person?
Absolutely. That's exactly what's happening. Because people are, in general, people are very fascinated by the crime and want the details. Okay? Yeah. Go ahead, Abe. Oh, crashes, not accidents. This is really quick. Journalists need to use the term crash for a drunk driving crash and not drunk driving accident. Because they believe that if somebody chooses to get behind a wheel and they know they're intoxicated, then if they get in a crash that kills somebody, how many people in this room don't know that if you drink and drive, you are potentially going to kill somebody? Anybody in this room not know that? Okay, so it's not an accident. It is a crash. You crashed into this person. They died as the result of the crash, not an accident. Okay, go ahead. Oh, this one. I never give this man any interview time. This is what a TV journalist, news reporter said to a print reporter, and I overheard it. I'm sure glad I didn't cover this one. It's a dud. He was talking about a murder of a 22-year-old female who was stabbed 53 times. But it's a dud. Glad I didn't cover it. Okay. Do you think that I'm going to ever talk to a family and go, oh, I really think you should talk to this guy. He's totally trustworthy. I'm going to be like, talk to anybody but this guy. Okay? That and he keeps forgetting my name. I've done this 13 years and he still hasn't got my name. All right. But besides that, I heard that and I've never forgiven him for it. Okay? Go ahead. Huh? Oh, sorry. Accurate media coverage of details is super important. The obligation is on you. I'm trying to hurry because I know you guys get out here. You need to be double, triple checking facts when you're doing a homicide or a traumatic story involving any kind of traumatized person. Go ahead, April. Go. I think we pretty much talked about all of these. Whoops, go back one more. I'm sorry.
Go back.
Yeah, one more. Go back one. Okay, I don't want to leave you with the sense that there are not positive things that the media does, because they really do. One of the things that they'll do is they'll give a heads up to the family when they're going to be releasing a 911 tape. Because that's incredibly traumatic for most family members. Another thing is that they won't automatically use emotional outbursts. They keep things off the record that the family says, please keep this off the record. And thinking long-term versus immediate, and that's one of the things Ben talked about. Go ahead, April. The man, woman, or child you face in an interview will sometime be an expert on violent, devastating experience, but probably not yet. And the survivors do not heal on newsroom deadlines. Good, April. This, just really quick, I just wanted to put out there that it doesn't make you any less of a professional if you have an emotional reaction to the stories that you're covering. Okay, that's something that you need to talk with somebody about, you need to get support with. Doesn't mean you're less of a professional, it means you're a human being. Go ahead, April. Oh, here's us. Okay, really quick. We have a toll-free hotline. We cover 14 counties in the southeastern part of the state. We have 3 employees, myself included. Everything is free and confidential. We do trial accompaniment with families. We do death notifications. When I went to talk to Cathy, death notification. When I talked with Emmy, death notification. So that's one of the things we do. We go with the family to do body viewing, and we also show them crime scene photos because we want to limit any surprises that they're going to have when they go to court. So I had a mom, her son was killed with a bar stool that they had actually bought and altered for their son. That was the murder weapon. How do you think she felt walking in to the courtroom when they used DNA from the bar stool that she had bought her son, right? So that's something we'll do. We have support groups. We have a newsletter that goes out quarterly. We do remembrance cards where we send a card out. It's done by survivors, and they send out cards to families when it's the person's birthday or it's the day that they died. So Cathy would have got a card by Monday saying, we know this is a hard day. We're thinking about you. We hope your memories of Sarah give you some peace. Okay. Information referral. A lot of what we do is like, this is a resource. This is a resource. I think you should see a counselor. Go talk to this person. You know, I think your kiddo needs to see a counselor. Go talk to this person. Assistance with filing victim compensation. Media liaison. We also educate survivors regarding deadlines, spacing, and editors. We do victim impact panels where victims will speak, like Cathy. We do trainings for professionals, and that's the number that you can call us. Yeah?
When you say training for professionals,
Once again, please, Cindy.
when you say training for professionals, do you train people in the media about how to do this? Because
No.
this is great information. Do they know this?
Well, they do if they took Ben's class at the U. Basically, when we're talking to professionals about it, we're talking with them more about victims' rights and dealing with victims during the different phases. Like, we did a presentation to all of the Lynn County police officers saying, when you are dealing with a survivor of homicide, you need to be aware, blah, 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 blah. So that's what it normally is. Or we do classes like this.
Other questions, Sam?
How did the two of you keep your life on an even keel, dealing with this all the time and all the time? How do you do it?
Here we go. One of the things I tell survivors all the time is that this is going to overwhelm any of the coping that you have developed through your life. So if you have 100 coping mechanisms that you use to deal with situations, this is going to take 101, okay? And so that's what I find for myself. We were just talking about this. Every time I think I've heard the absolute worst of the worst cases, then you end up with a news report saying the baby was found with maggots, okay? And I'm thinking, that's gotta be the worst. And then down the road, it'll be something horrible. So what I do is, I have a little dog that is a puppy. She keeps me very center focused because she requires so much energy. I find that when I do creative things, that helps me. I take photos, so I'll go out in the woods, take photos. I will watch really stupid movies, like Wedding Crasher or Talladega Nights, which I actually took quotes from and put it on my Facebook. My sister thought I lost my mind. She was like, what are you talking about? Because there was one about being a cocaine dealer and being a positive cocaine dealer, and she was like, what are you putting out there? I'm like, it's a quote. I'm not really doing cocaine. April.
I mean this with all of my heart. I have the best boss in the entire world. I'm not just saying that because she's standing right here. But in order to do this job day in and day out, you have to have a passion for what you're doing. and you have to be able to think outside of the box at all times. BJ not only allows us to do that, but she strives for us to do that. So my background coming into this was I was a 911 dispatcher for 15 years before being a violent crime and homicide victim advocate. These jobs are very similar. So some of my coping mechanisms, one thing is whenever we have a case or a client where we know things are getting out of control, or it's not the everyday, you're feeling more pressure, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, whatever that is, we'll go and we'll have a one-on-one with BJ. If we feel like we need something more than that, we are very fortunate in the Horizons building in Cedar Rapids. We have a mental health therapy team that is there, so we can do a one-on-one briefing with them. And she makes it mandatory after any case or any trial that we have to go in and do a debriefing. Even if we think, oh, it wasn't as bad as what I thought, pretty soon you're in there and you're like, yeah, I went to this trial and they showed this evidence and they showed this evidence, and then pretty soon I'm crying and I'm like, I didn't even know that bothered me. But it does. Another coping mechanism that I have one that's really healthy and one that's probably not so healthy. But I love to work with people and help people. I'm on our ambulance service in Belle Plaine. It's a volunteer service, so if I'm having a really crappy time and I just feel like I need to give back or get something back, I'll pick up an extra shift, which she's not always happy about, but for me, that's good. Or I love to play bingo, so I go to Meskwaki and I play bingo.
Very good. Well, we've run out of time again. I think the contact information, very important there. I know there are probably some other questions. We've run out of time, but I know BJ and April would love to have you get in contact with them with any other questions that you have about this valuable program. And thank you, BJ and April, for coming here to share. It's been an eye-opener for all of us. Thank you very much. Very quickly, while they're go ahead and put your things away, clean up a little bit. A few, before you leave, a couple of mentions about next week. Remember, next week is our final session, so we want to spend some time. Hopefully, I got an essay. I got homework turned in from Mary about so interviewing someone you know about a pivotal life experience. Okay, so you have the experience of interviewing too. Now, your feedback can be all just kept for yourself. You can share an insight or two that you gained from that experience. That's another response you can have. Another response you can have, you can bring a quote or two here, kind of tell us a little bit about what you experienced and a quote that you just thought was mind-blowing. Or you can even type it up and give me a copy. I'd love to read it. I'm looking forward to reading Mary's copy here as well. Also next week, as I mentioned, Clay Masters will be on the big screen like the great and terrible Oz. And we'll be able to quiz him about being an NPR reporter and his interviewing experiences and techniques as well. Also, maybe we'll get to, let's see what else we have here. Maybe we'll be able to talk Ira Glass. I know you had you listen to that interview. I know some of you have some thoughts about what you heard Ira Glass say in that interview. And then I think we'll wind up with an AMA. That's podcast lingo. Does anybody know what AMA means? It's an AMA edition of the podcast. At American Medical Association. It's Ask Me Anything. So, any question you wanted to ask about interviewing, I'll do my best to answer that question. But we'll see you next week. Thanks for being a great audience here today. We'll see you next week. Thanks.